Welcome to Stout for Christ, a radio ministry of Stout Memorial United Methodist Church in Parkersburg, West Virginia, with our host, Sarah Sisson.
I'm Sarah Sisson, host of Stout for Christ, and we're glad you're listening to our radio show today. Stout for Christ is a ministry of Stout Memorial United Methodist Church located at 3329 Broad Street in Parkersburg, West Virginia. We invite you to become a member of our Stout Church family. We offer 2 worship services each Sunday, a contemporary worship service at 8:45 and a traditional worship just following this broadcast at 10:45. If you can't join us in person, our services are broadcast live on Facebook and YouTube.
I'm Robin Stemple, and I am so pleased to be here today. Sarah is off on a work assignment and asked me to host the show today, so I am so grateful to be here today, back in the chair. And with me today is Pastor Helen Oates, pastor at Stout Memorial United Methodist Church. So welcome. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Robin.
So our topic today is a tough topic a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being a disciple. So discipling like Jesus. What does that word mean? What are we called to do? How do we do that? What do we do with that? Because we're not all good at it. It may not be a natural skill for everyone to understand what discipling is or being a disciple. So we want to talk about that for a few minutes. So where do we start?
Well, we start with what God has called us to do. God has called us through Jesus to go, to Jerusalem, to Judea, to Samaria, and to the all around the globe. And so what that meant was that message of Jesus needs to be spread.
Yes, but it's not just about going to those places and doing busy work, like serving in the food pantry or, helping in a volunteer kind of setting. There's more to this.
There is. When a person comes and decides, and of course we're getting less and less of those, but a person comes and decides to unite with a congregation, there's usually the membership vows. Maybe the person needs to be baptized along with that, and then it's like, okay, now what? What's going to happen in the life of that individual that's going to help grow them to look more like Jesus? And so that's where our discipleship, that's where we need to begin to form ministry around individuals in terms of helping them grow. And it's not just we want you to come and do this leadership training or this discipleship training. It's about realizing that we are to be like Jesus. So what that means in terms of becoming like Jesus, and oftentimes that means that we find those individuals, and the church folks helps us find those individuals who are gifted. And we ask those new folks coming in to be mentored by, so that others can help model, just like Jesus modeled for his 12 disciples, what it meant to live a life discipling others. You had mentioned that we're not all comfortable. What it is, I went through that era when, especially on a college campus, where a group would come up and say, are you saved? Do you know where you're going if you die tomorrow? Kind of thing. And it is, we turn that yes that we say to God, and we hear God say to us, we turn that in such a way that we are that we desire in terms of growing closer to be formed as a disciple.
So our whole administrative council, the leadership group in our church, has come together, and we have taken on this challenge of reading a book together and learning what being a disciple means and what it means in the life of the growth of our church, but also in the growth of us individually.
Right.
And what our responsibilities are as Christians. You can still be a member of a church if you never learn anything, if you never, if you attend every single Sunday, but you never have any personal growth, you still can be a member.
Exactly.
But what God calls us to do is be more. Mm-hmm. And that takes a deep look within ourselves about where we are and where we want to go. Mm-hmm. So this is an exercise that has been a real joy to participate in and a real learning experience. And like you said, we accept people into the church. We say those vows about what we will do to love and support that person who has just joined our congregation, and then where do we go from there?
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's what I hope and was wanting to help our church council to see about, what we need to be able to put into place to, grow ourselves deeper in faith and be more mature. One of our, the scripture talks about how we are fed by milk, but we need to get on to solid food. And so that's what this process, this learning together and doing together, it's not just additional knowledge, but it's a way of saying that, yes, I'm committed and I'm going to do an action or be a part. In the book that's entitled Disciple Like Jesus, there's a story, and it grabbed me right off. It's a story about two men who live in the same neighborhood. And Marty is the type of guy who is retired. He's putters around his house. He has time on his hands, so to speak, but he's not, quote unquote, religious. He doesn't go to church very often. If at all, in the last 25 years of his life, certainly doesn't commit any funds to any church. But yet in this community, Marty is the one who has people meeting on his front porch because, folks have seen him outside. His real passion is keeping a wonderful landscape around his house. And so, as people moved by, they would stop and chat. And so he knew the neighbors around, and oftentimes would gather with the men on the front porch of his house, and then whenever there was a need, somebody needed somebody to help put up curtains, or call Marty if somebody needed some help with an automobile getting it jumped. Call Marty. He's got a pair of jumping cables. So it was always that way in which Marty worked and lived within his neighborhood. And the other person named Phil and his wife Ann are very religious in terms of committed to their church, are regular attenders, if not once, oftentimes twice a week. They tithe, they are engaged in Bible studies, and work at the food pantry and attend leadership meetings, and so they are very active. And but when someone in the neighborhood calls for some assistance, Phil is usually running out the door in order to get to the church to do something there. So it's a different kind of relationship that that occurs. And so when we ask, like last week, we're asking the question, who is the neighbor? When we ask who is the disciple in this scenario, we find that the disciple is really Marty, in terms of the one who's able to respond to the need that's right in front of them.
So the point of the story is that you can go to a church every single Sunday, but that doesn't make you a Christian, and that doesn't mean you're doing God's work. And Marty, who has been away from the church for years, is definitely serving in that role as a neighbor, as Jesus defined it. Mm-hmm. And so I think the point of the story is to ask us which one of those we are.
Right.
And to encourage us to become more like Marty, but they're worshiping within a community. Mm-hmm. Listening to our radio program is important, but coming through the doors and worshiping in a communal way is also a really important part of growth, of becoming more like Jesus, which is what we've been called to do.
That's right.
Disciples into all the nations, right?
Yes. Yeah. There have been lots of statistics about what participating in church life, what that does for an individual physically, and emotionally. But they say that when a person prays, when they pray, that it is, it does something. It does bring more healing, more sense of calmness, more, to us, so that not only can we talk about our communal worship, we are designed to be in community. That's how we're made, and because we have that sense of wanting to belong. So, both of those, in terms of prayer and being in community, we find are beneficial to us.
So it's not just about, the physical part of getting up and going, to be with people, but there's actually a mental and physical health element that is connected to this this concept of being in a community. And then when you couple that with praying, with an active, being in an active mode towards, towards developing yourself and being with your God. There's a mental health and a physical health element to that. So
that's right.
It's important beyond just our spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I'm always amazed on a Sunday morning of all the chatter that goes on prior to worship. And it is, I just kind of suck it in, because it is, it's a testimony of the way in which people are reaching out to each other to be able to form that community. And, it's we don't want to let someone come in and just sit down on a pew and not be engaged in some way.
I received very much a surprise. I received a card from another member just in the last week, and it just said, I just was thinking about you, and I'm praying for you, and you're really important to me, and it just brought me to tears. Like, what a kind thing for someone to do, to take a moment and let me know that my presence is important. And we try to do that for each other. But on that particular day, I was reached in a very particular way, and it was so meaningful. But I'm part of that chatter on Sunday mornings as you walk in, and we're talking about the event that just happened or the event that's about to happen. We're talking about a need that someone has, and can you help fill that? And I too enjoy the hum of the chatter. Yes. as we build ourselves up to to reach that moment where we become quiet and we begin our worship.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we, in terms of discipling, being a disciple like Jesus, just for us to ponder how Jesus was around his own disciples, and that sense of, it's not a learning class, even though they often refer to Jesus as rabbi, but it was also this almost apprentice-like piece by being at table with one another, by walking those miles from one place to another, being together in similar work. It was, all of these pieces. They worshiped together, they prayed together, and it was these pieces that made them disciples, so that they could then, after crucifixion and resurrection, that they could be a disciple like Jesus.
So even among his 12, learning, allowing Jesus to be in the teaching mode, was very important. But Jesus demonstrated to us over and over that it wasn't just about learning. It was also about serving together. It was about breaking bread together. Mm-hmm. There's something about sitting down to a meal with someone that seems very close and very intimate. It's the place where you share your day, you share your thoughts, mm-hmm. and we take advantage of that. We do a lunch with friends mm-hmm. at Stout on Wednesdays. We have a Bible study that starts at 10, and anyone is welcome to join at any time. But it starts at 10 in the morning. It repeats at 6 p.m. in the evenings, and then we just as soon as that 10 a.m. Bible study is over with, we pull out our brown bags, or maybe somebody has cooked a pot of soup, or maybe somebody went out and got hot dogs, but we sit down and have a meal together, and it's a time that we discuss what's going on in the life of our church, and how can we help, and who needs help, and how our week is going to go, and where we can pray for each other and be a part of each other's development and growth. Not that we don't have a long way to go. We do. We all do. But I love that part. I love that Wednesday interaction, because it brings together that teaching and that that breaking of bread, and in many cases results in, okay, now how are we going to go serve?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah. And last week we mentioned the story, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I still, as we hear this in terms of how do we be a disciple, or how do we disciple like Jesus, we consider the way in which the Good Samaritan, though he was a foreigner, though he was hated by the Jewish community, and the Jewish community hated them in return, but how it was that individual who stopped and helped. And
not the Levite, not the priest.
Yeah. So it wasn't the quote religious folks, but it was an ordinary person who was referred to as a foreigner. And I think about in our world how we are treating the foreigners in our presence. The servers at a Mexican restaurant, or the migrant. I come from the eastern panhandle of the state. Migrant workers who care for orchards and farmlands and vegetables and just all kinds of things are being taken out of community. And so what does we're told by our world that it's to help protect us, help to make us more safe. But how are we treating those that we might consider a foreign presence in our lives?
And what would Jesus say?
Exactly.
What would Jesus do? Mm-hmm. What would Jesus have us do?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we come, as a church, we kind of know what Jesus would have us do, but we are reluctant to do it. We're reluctant to do it because, it may make somebody else mad. It may bring tension within families. So we come up with all of these excuses as to why we can't. But, our behavior is to reflect that life and love of Jesus.
Which includes inviting people to not just know Jesus, but come and worship Jesus and learn and grow together in a community of faith.
Yeah, and it can be, we can be deciding to be a part of the pickleball group that's forming at Stout, and no relation to I joined the church on this day or whatever, thinking, but rather the pickleball experience to be one where we find community even before we want to step inside the doors of the worship space, but a community that is geared on one item in terms of pickleball, but a community that helps us develop some relationships with folks we may not encounter anyplace else. And that is what Jesus calls us to in terms of developing those kinds of relationships. We have to transform our thinking. And, I use so often in worship the phrase, for us to be the people that God has called us to be. And how we then bring sense around that, becoming like Jesus.
So, tying our themes this week around discipling with our themes of last week of who is our neighbor and who do we serve. In that story, the Good Samaritan story, there was a legal expert, and there was a robber, and there were religious men who passed on the other side, and there was an innkeeper. But of all of the people in that story, it was only the Samaritan to whom that wounded man was a human being and worth being cared for and loved. And, Jesus has some pretty specific directions for us about what he expects from us and expects us to become and expects us to act a certain way. So I think these last 2 weeks I've been so pleased to be able to join you while Sarah's away, and I love these two topics, and I love how they marry together between who is your neighbor and how Jesus calls us to be a disciple in all the nations and all the world, baptizing people in his name.
Exactly. Yeah. And, one of the ways in which John Wesley had formed the way in which we grow in discipleship, as he would have these small groups. But one of the ways, not only they had to come and be accountable, but they also had to go and do. Could not just sit on the pew, so to speak, but had to be out in the community, transforming that community through the actions that they share. And in their accountability group time, to be asked that question, are you going on to perfection? And that's a scary question to answer because, we think about perfection in the life, when I get to heaven kind of thing. But it is a question that in God's kingdom now, are we going on to perfection? Are we looking more like Jesus each day?
Or are we expecting our pastor to do all that work?
Yeah.
But it's very clear. Jesus calls all of us. The church that I grew up in has etched in stone above the door, enter to worship, go forth to serve. Mm-hmm. And I would say, in addition to that, go forth, make disciples in all the nations.
Amen. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. I was so pleased to be here. Sarah will be back with us next week, but I was very pleased for the opportunity, so thank you for having me today.
Thank you.
If you were blessed by this program today and want to know more about how you can become part of the Stout Memorial United Methodist family, tune in to Stout Memorial's Facebook Live worship broadcast just after this program at 10:45 a.m. Send an email to stoutmemorial@gmail.com or attend a worship service in person at 8:45 and 10:45 each Sunday morning. This has been Stout for Christ, a radio ministry of Stout Memorial United Methodist Church, Parkersburg, West Virginia.